Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody, welcome to the podcast. So as always, quick shout out to one of my patrons. This time I'm going to give my shout out to George Leris or Lewis. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, George. So thank you for being my patron. I think George has been with me a few months now. Hope you enjoy everything we have on Patreon. And again, thank you for your support, make the podcast and everything else possible. So as always, guys, if you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/WimDemeere. My name, link is going to be in the show notes. A few quick announcements. So as always, you will find the show notes at wimsblog.com/48, numbers 48. I would also recommend you go to wimsblog.com/42 for the interview I did with Tammy a few months ago. It's going to be well worth it. That's the announcements regarding the show. Now, something else. I'm working on my home workout, full body home workout with the elastic band video. That's going to come out soon for my patrons. So if you want to get that one too, you can be on Patreon. All my patrons are going to get it. And then another quick one. I've just announced my online Tai Chi Chuan platform, which is at onlinetaichichuan.com. So I'm going to put a truckload of instructional videos for the Tai Chi style that I teach. Forms, self-defense, pushing hands, everything. So go to that website right now, onlinetaichichuan.com, and you'll find a little bit more explanation, and you can sign up for notifications when that goes live. Okay, that's it. I'm going to get right into the interview with Tammy Yard-McCracken, who's a psychotherapist and Krav Maga instructor, amongst many things. It's very in-depth about coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, and how to mentally and psychologically handle all the problems that come with it. All right, that's it. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is episode 48, and I have a returning guest, and that is Tammy Yard-McCracken. Hi, Tammy. How are you doing?
I am hanging in there. How are you doing?
Same thing. There's an ocean apart between us, but yeah, pretty much in the same boat, I think. Just a quick reminder for everybody. So Tammy's a psychotherapist, and I'm saying that correctly, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, yeah.
Psychotherapist and also Krav Maga self-defense instructor, among many things. And if you guys want to know more about her, I very much recommend you listen to the previous interview, and that's wimsblog.com/42, so numbers 42, in which we had a great interview as well. And today we're going to focus on something very specific, which is her field of expertise. We're going to talk a little bit about the whole coronavirus pandemic that's going on right now, and how you can emotionally and psychologically deal with all the things that come with that. Okay, that was the intro. So anything you want to add before we get started, Tammy?
Nope, that's fine.
All right, so we're going to start with the big question. And the first one is just generally. So this is a huge thing. It's for many people an instant paradigm shift. Like you wake up one morning and all of a sudden the world is upside down, everything's changed. How would be the best way to handle this?
I think having a context for it first is critical. So because we don't, right? So culturally, across the board in society, we don't have very many people, and not to sound morose, but we don't have very many people in our lives that have lived through other massive paradigm shifts. And so we're making this up as we go. And one of the things to do is to pause mentally and acknowledge that it's been a 180. And I think we're so busy, for all the obvious natural reasons, we're so busy trying to catch up to that paradigm shift that we don't give ourselves that moment to go, okay, this thing has happened. And I was speaking with a colleague and a dear friend the other day who has a touchstone for 180 things. She's been a operator and extraction specialist and kidnapping stuff and behind enemy lines activity for her adult career. And she said, so she used a very military analogy, but she said, this is like if you're on a carrier and it's time to turn, unless it's like a massive sudden dynamic, you hardly notice the turn of the ship. It's a big ship, takes a little bit of time to make that turn. But if you're in a Zodiac and it goes whoop, if you're not hanging on and your center of gravity isn't low enough, the boat goes this way, you go that way, and you're waving goodbye. And that's really what this is like. This is like a Zodiac 180. And a lot of us are left in the water trying to figure out how to get back on the boats. So that's the most perhaps valuable thing that we can do, is pause and assess and give ourselves a chance to catch up to the turn. Like, this was a 180, and acknowledge the reality of that. That's the tough part, because a lot of us are in sort of panic mode. And when we're in panic mode, we don't take a second and go, okay, what is this reality that I am in? And identify it. Because if we're all in the Zodiac. There's no aircraft carrier here for any of us. And so, some of us are in the water, and if you don't know you're in the water, you can't activate your personal flotation device. You can't throw the flare up. You can't start swimming to the boat. You can't do the things that we need, metaphorically speaking anyway, to get back in our boat. And if you don't know you're in the water, you can't do the things that you need to. So being able to pause and go, okay, what's happening in the physical universe? And where am I? Did I get pitched? Do I need to swim back? And also, I think it's a moment by moment proposition. There have been times where I've, in different aspects of life right now, where I feel like I've done pretty well. I've turned with the boat, anchored. I was locked in anyway. I had my lifeline connected to the Zodiac, and my center of gravity was low. It turned, I was with it. And other aspects of life where I'm like, oh, hi, I'm in the water, and I didn't make that turn. So I think the big thing is to acknowledge that it happened, and that it was a hard 180, and that begins to give us a starting point. And if we're not in that place where we can give ourselves permission to acknowledge it, then everything that we're doing is action inside of a somewhat false reality, because we haven't acknowledged the paradigm shift.
I really like that analogy of, like you said, the big carrier turning, and yours of, if you don't acknowledge you're in the water, you can't really start swimming, can you? I've changed some stuff on my YouTube channel and started doing a series about handling with everything here, this whole situation. And my first one was, I think it was titled something along the lines of Fundamental Realities to Accept, which was kind of trying to give the same message you gave, but in a more blunt fashion, I guess. I think you did a much better job giving the message that more people will be able to accept it. But I think that's a critical point, is that if you can't really accept that this is a game changer, and obviously a lot of people in media and so on have a vested interest in making you believe that this is going to be business as usual, then it's going to be really hard for you mentally and emotionally, and just practically speaking, just to get through this in one piece. And we talked about that a little bit before we started, but I think, and I'd like to hear your thoughts some more about this. One of the fundamental issues is the first part, like you said, okay, we are in the water, start swimming, start doing smart things that help you through this, that you don't drown. But at the same time, it's the shore isn't necessarily in sight. It's gonna take a while. You're in for a long haul of swimming, so don't sprint, but pace yourself, and this is going to take a really long time. And I'm talking years, not necessarily the acute phase of the pandemic, but the aftermath and the fundamental changes. So do you have any recommendations on that front, how to pace yourself mentally and emotionally for not just dealing with this Zodiac turning 180, but also like, okay, I'm going to keep going like this for a long time?
Self-care it's like the word of the day right now. And so I almost feel like I'm just repeating what all the talking heads are when I use that word at this point. But it's a real thing right now, and being able to take moments and do the things that we, like in the psychological industry, or, any of the parts of the universe where we've always talked about things to do to take care of yourself, the reality of that now is profound, because if we don't, then this long-term aftermath that is a reality is going to be far more brutal. So, and again, it doesn't have to be, I think a lot of people are, because this is a massive turn, we feel like everything that we are doing should equally be massive, equal reaction. And it doesn't need to be for it to be helpful. Honestly, one of the most valuable things right now is to pause and literally take a deep breath. There's a breathing exercise. There's variations on it. It's used in like TAC teams and stuff. Use this kind of breathing when they're getting ready, like to de-adrenalize, to go breach a door or what have you. And there are meditation practices that use variations of it, but which I'll hit here in a second. It's actually not, the short version is easy to do. And so a lot of people will look at something and go, well, that's too simple. That's too easy. How can that possibly help? Because the problem seems so dramatic and huge. And then there's this little bitty thing. How could this help? So any kind of a breathing exercise that people use, its help, if it's a good one, is that our bodies are designed to take care of our survival needs, right? So our whole survival stress response program is deep hardwire. And when we need to run very short distance from the tiger or the bear or the whatever that is, coming at us with great speed, there are lots of things our bodies need to do and lots of things our bodies do not need to do during that short burst of energy. So that's where the rapid adrenalization comes from. And we breathe differently there. We breathe shallowly and short, big puff, blowing breaths. Like if you watch an Olympic sprinter run, watch how they breathe. It's a very distinctive breath. If you're doing a 40-yard dash, you need a massive surge of oxygen, but to a very specific part of your body. So we breathe short, shallow, rapid, big, deep, kind of panting breaths. That tells your body to adrenalize. It tells your body to, and which is where those rapid power energies come from, the adrenaline and all the other chemicals that go with that allow the muscles to have extra strength, speed, and power for a very short period of time. So that sprinter's breathing gets us away from the bear. It gets us away from the immediate threats, but it doesn't allow us to run for the long haul. Long distance runners breathe very differently. And so if you watch one, and so I tell people, like, you don't take my word for it. Go pull up a YouTube video or something. It's a sprinter, Olympic level sprinter. Watch them run, and then go watch the very boring, full marathon guys halfway through the run.
All the marathon guys are getting really upset right now. But I agree.
Well, sorry, but like as a spectator watching somebody run, for 26.5 miles is like.
Same here. I agree.
So, but the value of that is that they breathe very differently because the body has a different goal. You're in this for the long haul. So you have to manage how your body oxygenates itself in a different pattern. And that's where we breathe more slowly, more controlled, more deeply. We hang on to the breath for a moment, releasing it more slowly. It creates literally a different physiological paradigm in the body. So when we are under high states of stress, even unconsciously, and I think that's part of it right now. So sorry, I'm sort of all over the map here, but because none of us are facing down a bear unless you are in an ICU unit right now, or you're a healthcare worker. That's a little bit more like looking at the bear. But for the most part, there isn't an actual in our face physical threat. And so it's hard for the brain the cognitive self to realize that the body is probably trying to respond to a bear while the, prefrontal cortex is going, not so much. So there's this internal paradox in our physiology. All that to say, recognizing that there's value in breathing the way the marathoners breathe from time to time is huge, because it resets, or it kind of tries to drive down that threat threshold that's been elevating back here in the back of our brains. And it's good for the whole body. So there's a simple, not always easy, especially if you have kind of spooled up and you didn't know it, is a slow inhale through the nose to like a 3 count. 1, 2, 3. Hold it for a heartbeat, and then release it to that same 3 count, releasing it through the mouth as a release, not a blow. So it's not because that's what our sprinters will do sometimes. They'll inhale, release it, get rid of all those toxins, inhale again. This is more like a balloon that you've blown up and you pinch off the neck of the balloon. You just let it go. So inhale, fill the balloon, hold for a heartbeat, release to that same 1, 2, 3, and then stop. Breathe normally for a few seconds and then do it again. And the rule of thumb is once you do that breath pattern and you feel like, okay, I'm okay, at the end of it, I could do another one consecutively, then do another one consecutively. The downside is if people have not practiced this kind of controlled meditative breathing before, and they do multiples of these back to back, the body doesn't know how to do it. It almost feels like it's starving itself of oxygen, and that creates a stress response. Yeah. So people don't get competitive with the breathing exercise. It actually makes things worse. Yeah. Right. So, and then the long-term goal is, if you do this 5, 6, 8 times a day, and you follow the instructions, which is don't do them back to back right away, then after a couple of days, you can start stacking them in through the nose, hold, release, in through the nose, hold, release. And the goal is to be able to stack about 3 in a row and not feel that kind of sense of oxygenation panic. And then keep doing that multiple times a day. Every time you do it, it interferes, it conflicts with the way our bodies want to breathe in survival stress response. So it forces that SSR to kind of go back down a little bit. And this is where people often will say things like, that's too pedantic, it's too simple, it's too easy for this massive stressor in my life. How could this possibly work? It's like, well, is what you're doing working now? So it's okay to not believe me or the research behind it. Like, it's okay, totally, don't believe me. Ask yourself a question, is what you're doing now helping? Is your stress level better? Okay, if the answer is no, then what do you have to lose to try something different other than you get to check the box and go, see, I was right, it didn't work. Okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So,
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this is one option. There's other things I can throw at you, but yeah. I'll let you speak because I rambled.
No, that's why I had a guest. No, the thing is, I wanted to say 2 quick things. I'm going to add this to the show notes. There's 2 books that Lauren Christensen wrote a while ago about meditation and mental imagery, which I think are good starting places for many people because they're very practical. It's yes. Just stuff that anybody can do. It's not, if Lauren's my mentor for many years now, I think I am safe to say that if there is one person who is not woo-woo, it's him. He is as no nonsense as it gets. Like, it has to be practical or he doesn't write it. And they're really good, a bunch of different types of meditation and breathing patterns and so on that you can use. And I'll link to that. And then the second thing I wanted to say, one of the courses that I often give in companies is about breathing, different benefits and how you can use different methods and for what purposes and so on. And and just like you said, it's not a competition. You always have a few type A personalities in there. No, I can hold my breath the longest than anybody else in the room. And it's like, no, that's not the point. You don't have to. You should actually listen to what your body says as opposed to try to beat everybody else. But a quick addition to that, one of the ways I read it once, and I really like that phrasing, is that we don't really have conscious access to a lot of our bodily functions and components and systems that are working 24/7 that keep us alive or keep us healthy, however you want to see that. However, we do have a few ways of indirectly influencing them and then eventually directly. And that is through the way you focus, concentrate, meditate, however you want to call it, and breathing. And that's about it. There's no button to push. There's no levers that you can pull. This is it. And if you want to, for instance, the people who work out, if you stretch, control your breathing, breathe in and out correctly so your muscles relax, so the muscle tone actually gets lowered so the stretch can get deepened. And if you hold your breath while you stretch, right away you know it doesn't work. Well, hello, this is the exact same thing. We're just focusing on a different bodily process, but it's the exact same thing. So you know this already that it works. So if you don't believe Tammy, okay, it's fine. Believe yourself when you stretch, when you see that works when you breathe. It's the same thing. Anyway, that's what I wanted to add. But I think this is a key point. And I mean, it's cheap. You have to breathe anyway. Might as well get the most out of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question. So I'm going to split this one up in two parts. Could you give some best practices for right now? Either, both for adults and then maybe adults, and I'm talking like people who are about our age, maybe a little bit younger, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. And then teenagers and maybe early 20-somethings. And why that? Well, because my experience is that pretty much all over the world, the teenagers and 20-somethings are having a hard time. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I mean, like here, you guys had the same thing with spring break. We had lockdown parties. There are still lockdown parties going on right now in Belgium. I read the latest research shows that over here, and this is from a few days ago, that 1 in 5 teenagers thinks it's all nonsense. And they're still hanging out with friends and getting together when they should isolate themselves. So just talking for adults, and if there is a difference for men and women, I don't know if that's something you could address as well. So some best practices for our mental and psychological well-being.
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the things is, because we've done this hard 180 and we're playing catch up, is an assessment of a realistic assessment of what really needs to be done, taken care of, handled, addressed. We don't oftentimes do a good job differentiating between what is authentically urgent, really needs our attention, and and putting out fires. So there are a lot of things that are just like little fires, and it's like, oh, they'll burn themselves out. Honestly, they don't really need our attention. But those are things that draw us because they're, using the metaphor, fires are bright and pop and, like, oh, it's a fire, right? It's threatening. I need to go address it. And so oftentimes we end up putting our focus, our mental, our cognitive focus into things that feel like fires, as opposed to being able to actually address something that might be validly urgent. And assessing is one of the things to do with that on a daily life. And just as a personal example, with shifting our business to trying to create things that are more online and looking at things from a standpoint of like, well, that feels like a fire. And so it's easy to get drawn away from the things that I actually needed to do to create functional programming for our students. And so assessing, is this a fire that I actually need to put out? Because a lot of times they're self-contained, they're going to burn themselves out. They don't really draw my attention in the sense that they're urgent. And so there's a difference. And so being able to assess that is important in the zodiac turn. And then once we're swimming, like, okay, and we're in for more of the long haul, is to self-awareness is key right now. And to a limit. So we can become so self-aware that that's all we're thinking about is our own thinking all the time. And then we lose contact with the external world and the external universe and all of the realities that we get to interact with. So this is, there's a continuum and a balance point within this. The starting point, though, I think for most humans right now is to do a mental check-in every once in a while. And by that, I don't mean every couple of weeks, which is perhaps how most people function. Like a couple of times a day, how am I doing? Where am I, like, and you're talking about our bodies, that most of our internal communication is outside of our conscious awareness for a reason. If we had to tell ourselves to breathe in and breathe out all the time, that's all we wouldn't be functional to do anything else. So this is the physical body will give you feedback. If mentally, cognitively, it's difficult to connect. Like, how am I doing? We don't have maybe even language to describe it because new paradigm, we might not have words for some of these experiences in our language set, is to stop and check in physically. And there's an old school NLP based technique that's really good for that. And that is, if you say, okay, what am I feeling right now? And you're like, nah, I don't know. I got nothing. I don't have a word for it. Is to go through a process of saying, okay, if the experience that where I'm at right now, mentally, emotionally, was a shape, what would it be? And just pick one. Don't overthink it. Don't go, I don't know, should it be a rectangle, or it should be it's like, first thing that comes to mind, it's a circle. Great, go with that. And then if the shape had a color, what would that be? And my overthinkers hate this drill because, like, well, I don't know, like, is it a solid color? Is it a translucent? It's like, just pick a color. Just go, literally first thing that comes to mind. So shape, give it a color. And then if the shape lived in your body like an organ, where would it be? Do you feel like it's in your knee? Awesome, that's where it is. Does it feel like it's in your nose? I don't care where it is. Is it in your elbow? Is it in I don't care. Just find a spot in your body that, for whatever crazy reason, that's the spot you feel like it's in. The arch of your foot. Okay, fine. All right, so it's a circle. It's this color. It lives in the arch of your foot. And now give it a temperature. When you touch it, hot, cold, on a continuum, and give it a texture. And so you just go through this process, and basically we're defining the emotional, psychological state through something that would otherwise be tactile and objective. And it bypasses all of the defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms and all of that are not wanting us to contact how we're actually experiencing if it's difficult, because it's one of the ways we survive difficult experiences, to avoid it. So it gives us an opportunity. So you go through this process, give it shape, color, texture, temperature, and then make it three-dimensional. And then if I'm coaching this, I'll say, all right, so in a second, there's going to be like a little flap or door, because it's a sphere, that you can open up and look inside. And inside, on a old-fashioned note card, will be written one word. And when I say open the door, look at the word and tell me the word that you see. Now we attach language to it. So up to this point, it's not a language-based process as far as the center in our brain. We're using other places in our brain to connect in. And then at the end of the day, because we are story, we are narrative, we use language to create reality for ourselves, then we have to connect it back into that state. So that is a quick coping mechanism, and it's helpful because it allows us to get conscious of the state that we are in. So if you're checking in, back to why I'm saying all this, do a self check-in a couple times a day. How am I doing? And
okay.
well,
that's great. That's great. And I wanted to ask also, is this different for men and women, this kind of stuff, or am I looking too much into it?
No. So there's really, ultimately, at the end of the day, at that state of our brains, there isn't really a difference in how we function. There are some social differences in how we function. So women have a tendency, socially and culturally, to be more of the community keepers. And men have a tendency to be more of and again, this is cultural paradigms, are the lone wolf soldier warrior, right? So from that standpoint, those are going to be the places where we struggle the most as far as a gender difference. Men are more likely to feel very frustrated and angry because they can't fix it for the people that they love. Women are more likely to be frustrated and angry because they can't gather the community together to take care of the community in the way that they are accustomed to. And so if you want to, like, why am I so pissed right now? And you're a guy, maybe stop and look at, all right, where do I feel powerless? Because normally I'm the one out there who's, taking care of the people and going after fighting the threat. The threat is very intangible right now. where women are going to, generally speaking, are going to struggle with, how do I keep my community together? How do I keep the bonds active? And how do I help the community in crisis? Because one of the things that women have a tendency to do in certain kinds of cultures is, you're in crisis, I'll feed you, that kind of thing. And that's a little hard to do right now. So the gender differences at a neurological level, not so much. It's going to be more socially and culturally how we feel called into life and crises. And those things are going to be frustrated right now.
All right. Makes perfect sense. Anything similar about best practices for like teenagers and early 20-somethings?
Yeah. So you nailed it. They are not, they're still functioning in an Achilles heel reality. And that's part of their neurological development until you hit about 25. The logic assessment centers of the brain are a little bit like a broken neon sign. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, which is why our, 15 to 25-year-olds sometimes make decisions. We're like, did you not see that? That was like, how did you not see that this was going to end up this way? And that's because that part of their brain goes, whoa, I'm off right now, not making it, not functioning. And so they're going to struggle from that level. They're going to struggle because they also have, easiest way to explain this, 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds don't have a concept of what we call calendar. They can't, because object permanency is a little iffy still developmentally. And so when you say next month to a 2-year-old, it means nothing. You might as well say forever from now. And so we dial that forward. The 20-year-old, the 18-year-old, 5-10 years from now is something that the only touchstone they have is, well, the difference between 8 and 18. But those literally are different universes for them. And so they don't, the difference between 38 and 58, at 38, you can kind of see, okay, at 58, I can see that from here. But at 18 and 20, not so much. So it's, for those of us around them, we can help them by acknowledging that they can't see that.
Yeah.
And they can intellectually understand it because they have the capacity for that, but emotionally they don't have that reality to work from. And so our job then as the elders in their community is to acknowledge that and give them some space when they're ranting and venting. I have a 20-year-old, and it's been a challenge sometimes. He'll come in because he's at home now because he's not at university. And he'll come into the kitchen and blah, 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 about, and the stupid this and the stupid that and blah, 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 and so forth, and makes it worse. He's an economics major.
I'm sorry. I feel so sorry for you right now. I'm sure he's a great kid, but yeah.
Exactly. So part of helping him manage is also managing myself, because we were in the car the other day, and he's blah, 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 blah. And I finally, I was like, I said something, and he's like, oh, no, I was just enjoying the debate. I was like, certainly did not sound that way.
Yeah, I went to the same thing. My daughter, she's studying to be, I don't know if there's a term in English, but it's engineer of commerce. It's kind of like the bridge between manufacturing and the commercial side of a business. And she's really smart, and she has a strong will. I have no idea where she gets that from. But I had to, I literally told her, I said, look, you're an adult. She's 19, she's closing in on 20, so I cannot force you anymore. But this is the first time I'm actually going to beg you. I don't want you to go back to your dorm. I want you to stay here. Because this could, if this goes into a full lockdown, it's going to happen any day. I don't know when. I think it's going to happen next week. It did. But I think it's going to be a mild lockdown first. But if it isn't, if it's a full lockdown, you're going to be stuck there, and you don't have the resources there to stay safe and have food and everything else you need for weeks on end. If you're here, I can give you that. But that was very difficult discussion that took an entire day. My boy's closing in on 18. He's got a girlfriend, which he's not allowed to see. They're living really close to each other, few miles away, but they're not allowed to see each other. And just last week we talked about that. I said, how are you guys doing? Because they're at their mom's place right now. And he said, yeah, 2 more weeks of this. I hate this, and this, this sucks. And I'm like, look, okay, so let's say that you both hop on your bike and you meet in the middle and you see each other. You're supposed to stay 6 feet away from each other. Are you going to keep to that? He says, no. I said, well, okay, so let's say that you're infected or she's infected and the other one is not. And, you hug and kiss and so on, fine. The other one is now infected, goes back home. So yes, there are teenagers and infants actually who die from this disease. It's relatively low numbers so far, but okay. But you just infected the entire family maybe. That means grandma, grandpa, your mom and dad. It could be her mom and dad, her grandma, her grandpa. So the best thing you can do right now if you love her is to stay away from her. And then we get to the whole okay, so that's the logical part.
Yes.
And then the emotional part kicks in.
Yeah. And I think that's the best thing we can do as the more, elder people in their lives is give them the space for that emotional part to play out, because, it's at moments their logic is going to be there and at other moments it's not. And I think that's one of the tough things for us as the parents in their lives is to remember that once in a while they're going to slip a gear. And so we're like, but you were super logical 5 minutes ago. What happened? That is the way they're wired to operate. And I think I love what you did in your conversation with your daughter, because that's a best practice for us, even all the way down through young children, is this feels like all of our power has been stripped from us. And so even tiny humans have an understanding of a degree of autonomy. And so as much as we can enroll them as part of the decision-making process helps them feel like they have some control and some power, and we're more likely to get compliance rather than becoming authoritarian in this. And creating and with young children, you can't go, well, what do you want to do? And then they tell you and you're like, okay, fine. So using a forced choice approach, which is you say, okay, so, I want you to help us choose, and here are the options, right? Yeah. And you give to them, right? So that you narrow the field.
Exactly.
And that's 20 down to 2, honestly, adjusting it for the person and the age level and the cognitive ability. But that's this disempowering sensation right now is brutal. And then I think for the kids, they're so socially driven, is creating, again, as many opportunities as we can. Like I'm going to offer you opportunities, with, again, my 20-year-old does not have a girlfriend at the moment. He swore them off after his first year in university. And he's got a couple of, he's very tribal. And he has some close-knit buddies from high school that he has stayed in contact with. And now they're all back here. And so there's this desire to go hang with them. So I offered up I've got the Zoom account for the gym, get on there with, Jackson, and you guys do your thing. I'll set it up. You guys can hang out for 3 hours. I don't care. Play video games together, whatever. And so creating resources for them. And he has not taken me up on that offer, but I think part of it is that the offer was made. That we provide our younger people a sense of there are options within this. They may look like bad and even worse right now, but we do have a degree of choice that remains for us. And that is also a coping mechanism for us as adults to remind ourselves, there is a degree of autonomy that remains for us.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ways I ended it, that one of those talks was just by saying look, I have to backtrack a little bit. When my girl was 18, I took her out for half a day, and we went to do a bunch of things, and I had the big talk of this is life, and I said from now on my job changes. Legally speaking, you can say bye and leave, and I can't stop you anymore. I hope you don't, but my role changes, more like being an advisor as opposed to an authoritarian figure. While you live under my roof, so to speak, there are still certain rules, obviously. But I mean,
Right.
you can go now. I can't stop you. But here are some things I think you need to know about how the world works. We thought, we had that, and my boy has that coming up in a few months. The point is this: I ended my talk with them last week, and I said, look, this is what it means to be an adult. You guys want to be adults. You want to do all the adulting thing. Okay, it's fine. This is one of the things it means. Along with the freedom comes responsibility, and in this day and age, like with the pandemic going on, that translates into doing things you don't want to do, or not doing things you really want to do. That's a huge part of being an adult, and you guys getting a crash course right now. And I'm sorry
Yep.
it goes this way, but you were going to get this anyway, sooner or later. So this is the moment where you have to level up. They're 17 and a half, 19 and a half, so they get this. But I said, look, you got to grab yourself by the scruff, so to speak, pull yourself up, and like, right, I'm on it. I'm not going to let this thing crush me.
Yep. And that's, I think, the what I hear and what you're saying that is incredibly valid is the other aspect of children, because I know that was on your list too, is like if we get down to younger kids. Tiny humans are smart. They may not have wisdom and they may not have experience to work off of, but they're smart little critters. And that's why they figure out Santa Claus isn't real, and, long before as parents, we might release that tradition. They know. They just don't want to acknowledge it, to play along for a few extra years. And so they're smart, and honesty is critical right now. And that's your conversation with your kids. It's very honest. And so when children ask questions right now, the answers need to be honest. Now, giving them a report off of, Associated Press news is not appropriate because too much information. But clear, honest, short answers. And for us, as the adults in their universe, answer the question that they ask, which means back to self-awareness. As adults, we have to take that breath and listen to the question asked by the child and answer that. And then don't backfill with more information, because that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
And then wait and see if they have another question. Answer that. And that's how to help our littlest ones make it through this. Is honesty is the key without panicking through the information and providing more information than they can process or deal with, and managing our own emotional sensor. So when they ask a question, we don't go, oh my gosh, and blah, blah, blah. And, that's not helpful. It amps them up, and then we get amped up in response because our, feeds itself. It's an Ouroboros.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you just made by, be self-aware and answer only that question, because somebody else, I saw this somewhere, I forget where, but said that, look, several years down the road, many children or, adults by that time, who knows, they will not remember every single detail about what happened during the pandemic, but they will remember how you acted, how you behaved, and the overall vibe of what it was like to live in quarantine or in lockdown. So if you freak out as a parent the whole time or get emotional, and I told this to my kids as well. Many years ago, I lived in an apartment, and the neighbor downstairs was a single mom who yelled all the time to her, I think, 3-year-old and 5-year-old or something. And I said, look, I never yell at you guys. This is what it's like when somebody yells at you the whole time. You get used to it, and it doesn't have an effect, and you learn that. If you get angry, you start yelling at people, that's perfectly fine. So I don't want that for you guys. You as a parent have to be aware of that's the message you're sending. And during this time of crisis, you've got to be their rock. You have to be the safe haven. Like, okay, if mom or dad is constantly hyper emotional and losing their shit, so to speak, well, okay, how can I trust them? They can't control themselves. How can they save me, so to speak?
And that goes to the honesty. So the other night we're all going to have those days where we're not great. And I was not great. And the, 20-year-old comes bopping in. He's actually in pretty good space, and he's blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, this isn't going to go well. So, because I need some space right now. And so again, honesty. I just looked at him and I went, I'm not doing great at this particular moment. Anyway, oh, okay, got it. And those are those moments. And then the other kind of going back to like the big paradigm shift skills and tools that we can use is self-awareness. I feel like I'm, nailing that hammer down through the next board. But when our de-escalating everybody means you have to de-escalate yourself first. And the only way you can do that is if you know that you're escalated. And if there's a moment where you're not always going to know you need to de-escalate yourself until you're grinding against somebody else and there's conflict escalating. And then it's like, clamp it down, put that jaw together. Don't speak for a minute and literally breathe.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, perfect. I've got a few more questions that I'd like to cover. What would be some of the negative ways that people cope with the situation that are self-destructive or really not productive at all?
Yeah, great questions. So defense mechanisms in the psychology world tend to get tossed around as all like, oh, you're using a defense mechanism, you're broken. We didn't make them up as tools and tactics. Humans have always done them to survive difficult moments, and they serve a purpose. So where it becomes problematic is when they start to become harmful. And there are a couple ones that as a whole tend to be more potentially risky than others. And from a socialization standpoint in our people in our lives, projecting is when I am like, I'm upset about something and I put it on you instead. Yep. So I'm really angry. You walk in the room and you say something, it's like, you're always angry. And you're like, what the fuck? Like, I don't think so. Right. So being, again, the combatant for that is, self-awareness. Like, actually, I'm really angry right now. So projection can be fairly damaging within a relationship. Displacement is a similar pattern, where I take, like, if I'm upset about you, but I make it somebody else's fault. I'm mad at my boss, so I'm mad at my kid instead. And those are potentially damaging in our social framework because the other person that is experiencing that process is very confused, and then the relationships can begin to fracture if those become semi-consistent functions within the individual. So, particularly, so there's a distinction between suppression and repression, like we talk about memory and stuff like that. So repression of the two is the one that has the greatest difficulty, the greatest potential damage, because it's a form of denial in a sense. It's absolutely not part of my reality, and those are like overfilled water balloons, and that the structure of the balloon can only handle that pressure for so long, and there'll be a weak point and it'll spring a leak. And so if you completely repress what's going on and you completely repress your emotional state, it is going to start impacting other areas of your life, but it will do it so subtly that you won't be able to catch it and you won't be able to fix it. So that's a problem. A degree of denial is healthy right now in the sense of, like if you're like go into, which is the flip side, if you go into a lot of like fantasy projection of what's going to happen, it looks very dark and scary. Allowing yourself some denial of like, no, it's going to be fine once in a while is good. Full denial takes us to the kids who are still out there throwing parties. No, oh, this isn't real. It's not real. That's obviously very dangerous, and partly why we're experiencing some of the explosions in the numbers in certain places that we are experiencing that. I think other ones that would be really projection, displacement, consistently, repression are big ones right now. Pure fantasy, slipping into fantasy, dissociating. And then I guess then the question comes like, well, how would you know? Because those are kind of mental slips. And that's things that you can do to kind of check yourself would be, as uncomfortable as this might be, like, how do I say this? So I wouldn't set a calendar up where you're marking off the days unless you feel like you're losing some contact with objective reality. Because if you're marking off the days and you're not, then that can actually be depressing. Like how many days we've been in quarantine. So that may not be useful there. But if you're concerned that you're losing some contact, like we're all struggling with what day it is right now a little bit.
Exactly. I was just
right?
going to say that.
Yeah. So, and that's normal under the circumstances. But if it's like, really, if you ask like what day of the week it is, like what day is it? And you really can't answer that question. You can't even logically fill in the blank. Like, well, on Monday I did X and it's been 2 days, so it must be Wednesday. Like if that is not available, then there's a potential of a degree of like your contact with objective reality may be starting to fray a bit, which is not uncommon in full isolation in humans. And so then finding ways to remain in contact with reality. What day of the week is it? Okay, get a calendar out, start marking it off. Make a list. What did I do today? Or literally, if you don't list, I list because otherwise I forget everything. Start listing. Today I am going to. And then check it off. And that might include, honestly, taking a shower.
Yeah.
Because those are the things that start to fade when normalcy is no longer dictating our schedule.
All right, that's really good. I like that a lot. Totally different question. How to deal with people who are irrational, angry, and so on, because, I mean, everybody's under tremendous amounts of stress. So anything you can give on that front, and I want to split this up in 2 parts if possible. So first, it's when you do have to go outside, you have to go shopping sometime. Again, I don't know where people are in the lockdown phases and quarantines. I'm still allowed to go to the store and stuff like that, but I know in some countries it's even a lot more strict than that. So generally speaking, let's say you can go outside. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of fights. There's fights over toilet paper and the most ridiculous stuff going on. I mean, understandable, but like normally nobody would bat an eye to even get angry about that. And now it blows up. Oh. So you're dealing with irrational strangers in public, and then same thing at home, family, friends, spouse, and so on. Over here already, they were warning very early on about domestic violence going to spike. So if you could talk about those 2 a little bit, strangers and then family, friends, spouse, and so on.
The strangers is almost an easier, well, it is an easier thing to deal with. Almost is not an appropriate qualifier there, in the sense that if you do need to venture out, like here, we can still be out for, essential needs and things like that. That kind of tacking denial in here. Before you leave the house, mentally acknowledge everybody is crazy, right? So that I have an expectation that I'm going to encounter people who are struggling, and it just touch that reality before you venture out in public. And then if everybody is fantastic, then I get to be pleasantly surprised. And that goes to one of the things that I can comment as a moment of gratitude for the day. Everybody was very helpful out in public today. Great. And it really goes back to all our basic self-defense paradigm. Avoidance is the highest order win. And we are, as a whole, actually instinctively good at reading people. We just forget to do it because we don't need it as much in modern society. So beautiful opportunity. We're supposed to be 6 to 10 feet apart when we're out in public. So if you are 6 feet away from somebody, look at the body language, right? If the body language says, I'm a porcupine right now, then that's quills are up. Okay, right? Just go the other way. Don't engage it. So avoidance is, even with self-defense, that is the highest order win. If you can't avoid it and something's escalating, leave. It follows our same progression in taking care of ourselves physically and under a person-to-person threat in self-defense paradigm. And if you can't leave, then de-escalate it. And de-escalating goes so that don't be right. Like highest order win and de-escalation, don't be right. Like internally, even if you are, just it's not useful. It's not helpful. If the other person needs to be right for this to de-escalate, let them be right. If they're screaming and yelling at you, okay, it's fine. It doesn't feel fine,
Yeah.
Right? In like, woo, our whole system activates. And so that's our job to go, this is in any other reality, would I, it probably wouldn't be here. So this is unique. This is based on the circumstances right now. I'm going to assume, that so here's where projection can be helpful. I'm going to create a story in my head about you. If you're this stranger and you're raging at me out in public, that your closest loved one just died. Okay, so that would explain you're crazy right now. And how would I then respond in that story? Well, I wouldn't escalate you. I wouldn't go, well, you're a fucking asshole, because you're yelling at me right now. If I knew that you just lost the most important person in your life to the pandemic, I'd cut you some slack, right? So it's whatever we have to do to de-escalate ourselves is the key to de-escalating somebody else. It's relatively unlikely that somebody's going to aggress physically at another human being in public if both parties have not gotten involved.
That's a really, I think you're just really on the money here. And one thing I want to add, because I think it's relevant, is Wiebe, one of my patrons, sent me that story, and it's of a woman, a 60-year-old woman in a supermarket. She's at the register, and all of her stuff is already out of the cart. And there's a guy behind her who's walking past her and back behind her a few times because he's grabbing potting ground that is standing on the other side. But he's coming way too close. He's supposed to stay 6 feet away, and she'd apparently already commented on something, and he keeps on doing the same thing. He told her to get lost or something. She gets angry. She kicks him. He throws one of those big 20-pound bags of potting ground right at her, and she goes down, obviously, and then the whole discussion starts: who's right or who's wrong, right? And my point is only this in relation to what you just said, is that assume that you're maybe crazy a little bit as well, as you go out and say, like, right, everybody's nuts, okay, but yeah. I'm probably a little bit on edge as well. So maybe I need to stop myself before I get angry too, and this whole thing escalates, or I get to the place where I am unable to de-escalate or leave.
Yep, absolutely. We're all a little nuts right now, and that's the best, most functional paradigm as far as managing people out in public that you don't know, strangers. It's also a relevant way to think about working inside of our in-home relationships and our close personal relatives. And we have the same thing here about the awareness of domestic violence is, even for relationships that were not otherwise going to become physical in their state of conflict, they might now, because we're trapped together. So
well, that brings us to the second part of the question, the family, friends, spouse, and so on, and in particular domestic violence.
And that's a tough one. So I'll start with the easier one. If even in the smallest of quarters, we can find ways to distance, even if it's just psychologically, emotionally distancing, and giving ourselves a timeout, and that is create space. If you're lucky enough to live in a home like here in the DC metro area, housing costs are very expensive. And so a lot of folks like us in that kind of mid-income level, we live in townhomes, so they stack. It's not much ground, and they go up. So the upside to that is it's easy to isolate. You just go up a flight of stairs, and you stay away from each other for a while, and that's a valid tool. But if you can't, if you're in a very small space, there are other ways to self-isolate. If you have headphones, say, hey, I'm disappearing for a little bit. Listen to whatever you need to listen to, and do it in a way that the other person isn't, part and party to what you're doing. And the flip side of that is that we also need to make sure that we're maintaining our bonds and our relationships in ways that otherwise we don't think to do. So there's a deliberateness and connectivity that's important as well. And like, hey, I need a hug right now. Okay. And just check in with each other and do things you might not normally do. Like, again, 20-year-old is not usually going to play Scrabble with his mom. But he used to play it all the time as a kid with my mom. And so, like, that's a thing I think that might live the soft place in the back of his brain that feels good and loved. And so it's like, hey, let's play Scrabble. And it was really amusing, too, because one of the words that the only word he could make at that point and not lose the turn was one that was a little uncomfortable for a 20-year-old male to use in the presence of his mother. And so there's this great moment. He's like, I'm really sorry, but it's all I have.
That's great.
Yeah. So, find those moments internally. And then domestic violence. This is where, so all of the authorities are not going to like me right now, but the same rule of thumb applies now as that has always applied. Get out.
Yeah.
And I know that it's like, yeah, but I'm not supposed to. Okay, so now you have to choose. This is a bad versus even worse forced choice. And if my options are bad and even worse, choose bad. Right? So yes, people are dying from COVID-19, but not everybody. And if you are at risk of severe level of physical violence versus at risk of being exposed to an illness that you may or may not get medical care for, bad and even worse, go with bad, get out. And the reality also is most of the social systems within our governmental agencies are conscious of this right now. There are more hotlines up right now. There are more people manning them. There are more resources available specifically for domestic violence. If you live in a gray zone where you think that your household may tip in that direction, before it does, go look at the resources that are now available. Know what your resources are, because they are probably different than what they have been.
Yeah.
So check it out and know what you have.
Yeah. Even over here, just a quick example, we have now special counselors that are available for police when they go out on a call and it's a case of domestic violence, or it's known cases. They just offer that as one of the solutions. It's voluntary, obviously, but right, you can go into counseling via Skype and video chat and so on with somebody who's licensed to do this, and it's if I'm not mistaken, it's free. So it's like you said, this is stuff that normally isn't necessarily available, but right now it is. So really, just take those chances, because, like you said, if you're actually really at risk right now, the chances of this situation escalating to the point where it goes too far, or that you're not going to make it out alive, being blunt, those odds are going up rapidly. And if they're not going up now, this is one of the critical things, and I've talked about this a little bit in one of my videos on YouTube about phases of a pandemic, but I'll quote one of the virologists here when I remember the week when we had one person dying of corona, and then we had 10, and then the journalist said something in the interview like, "Oh, well, it's all of a sudden 10 people." He says, "Look, probably by next week we're going to look at 10 people dying on one day of this virus as low numbers, and the week after that we're going to look at 50 or 100 people dying per day as low numbers, and it's going to keep going like that for a while." So you have to make rapid mental shifts as we go through the different phases of a pandemic. Nobody knows how long each phase lasts, but this can look like, okay, I can manage him because I've been managing his tendencies for so long. No, you're in a different reality, which brings us back to the zodiac turning and accepting reality for what it is. So it's not business as usual at all. Yep.
And I think that's a very valid point, is that we have a tendency as part of the denial structure that is there for a reason. It buys us time to catch up, is that, oh, this is just like always. They yell, they scream, they throw things, maybe, there's a slap or a push or a shove, and that's all that we ever do in our relationship. And so therefore that is all we will continue to do. And that is not necessarily true. And here, denial becomes very dangerous.
All right, great. Next question. How to handle the stress or cabin fever of being in quarantine or in lockdown? Some tips for that.
Get creative. Right? Adaptability is the word of the day. If I'm a horrible one for actually working out at home, I don't do it very well. I never have. And so I'm forcing myself to, because I don't get to go to my normal places. Like I can come here to the gym, our training center, but it's just me because I'm the owner. I'm the only one really allowed to be here. So I find ways to get creative in getting your body moving. If you have stairs, set a timer, because we don't want to, we don't like it, right? So set a timer. It says, an alarm that goes off at 11 o'clock. Get your butt up, walk up and down the stairs 5 times. Pick up something new. Everybody's doing everything virtually right now, right? Pick up as a martial artist, for example, I've always had an interest in modern Arnis. So now I'm following some of my people I know who teach that. And I'm like, oh, I can learn a little bit of that right now. All of the language programs,
yeah,
right? Learn a new language. And it's not something that we want to do. And I think that's key, is that it sounds like, oh, learn a new language, yay. But when it comes to it personally, we're like, because it forces me to acknowledge the reality and I don't want to, right? So we have to kind of grab ourselves and pull ourselves forward and finding creative ways to do things. And then the things that you do enjoy doing, remind yourself you enjoy them and do them more. And, it's like my 20-year-old has a good musical ear. And so he and his buddy virtually have been working with their computer programs that, synthesize music and all that kind of stuff, and they're creating music. And like, hey, maybe we could make money off of this someday. And I'm like, it's actually pretty good, but you're probably not, the next whatever, pop artist. But it doesn't serve to tell him that, right? Like, run with it. Have, do things for the value of the enjoyment. And if you have an instrument you haven't played in a long time and it lives in your house, dust it off, but don't get competitive because you haven't played it in 10 years. You're going to suck, but that's okay. It's okay that you suck. Just get creative, do more of the things that you actually enjoy, and I know everybody's online watching Netflix and all that kind of stuff right now. That's actually not a bad thing to do. If you like to do that, though, expand your horizons on what you watch. Go watch a documentary instead. However, I'm not sure how, it's like I want to smack Netflix right now. They're releasing all this stuff, right? All the different HBO, everybody, they're releasing stuff to give people more things to watch. And like the Netflix will tell you, like, at least here in the US, what's trending. And it's all the pandemic post-apocalyptic movies. I'm like, I don't think that's really helping.
Nope. Nope.
So I would not advise that you watch, like, you binge weekend all of the, post-apocalyptic pandemic, whatever. I haven't seen any of them, so I don't know the titles. Don't do that. That's not good.
Yeah, I told my kids that, I said, look, one of the few advantages of this pandemic and you being locked at home is if you got more time to do stuff because you're not spending it in traffic or going from one place to the next. So, right, okay, what are some of the things that you actually always wanted to do that you can do at home or learn or make progress on? Now's the time.
Yep.
My daughter writes, I said, fine, okay. She's actually quite busy with college work, but I said, if you have the time, do some writing. You want to do that anyway. My boy is in my mixed martial arts class. He wants to, he really likes the training. Flexibility was an issue. It was getting better, but he was not there yet. So, all right, he's been stretching twice a day now. And he texts me like, okay, well, I'm making really a lot of progress. But I'm like, of course you are, because you're doing like twice the amount you normally do, if not more. Isn't that awesome? Because you're going to come out of this better than before. And that doesn't take away all the negative aspects, but at least, you didn't just Netflix and chill. You got something out of that that is not per se negative or something that isn't really all that relevant. All right.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go over the other questions because I think we hit the 1 hour mark already, which is fine, by the way, but we have to get to the bonus episode on Patreon as well, which is going to be publicly available, folks. I'm not going to deprive anybody of what we have next. Quickly, so how do you handle your children as a parent? And I'm talking mostly about the not teenagers anymore, but like small children, preteen and early teenage years, stuff like that. Just to distinguish it a little bit from what we talked about before, because many people are now stuck with like a 5-year-old, which is very different from a 10 or 12-year-old already.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one of the things is to remember that young children, even though many of our educational systems don't embrace this, young children really, really learn fantastically well through play. And like here where we live, they're getting support from the school district, but everybody's home for the rest of the school year. And because the schools are shut down through the end of the traditional school year, as far as in person. So a lot of what I'm watching from friends of mine who have young children at home who are now sort of quasi at home schooling, they're trying to be these really good teachers and it's like, let them play. Let them learn through play. Let them be 5. We don't suddenly have to become something that we are not with our children. So I think that's important. And then also, this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit before. Be honest in your conversations with your children and include them, invite them into things that you might not normally invite them into. When we're busy, let's say, and we throwing dinner together, we have less of a timeline now. So, give the 5-year-old a spoon and a whatever, they can half mix the dressing or what have you, and maybe they're not going to do it right, and then you got to kind of follow up behind them, but that's fine. Get them engaged in the household. One, it creates distractions, and 2, it creates an opportunity for them to grow and learn in different ways. The older kids are there's a balance between that more egalitarian and an authoritarian parenting. There's going to be a point at some point with all of our kids where we are going to have to go, sorry, bud, this is the way it has to be. But working our way up to that by creating invitations and opportunities, go off script as much as you can. Like if kids got to do X and what you're doing to get them there isn't working, then shift gears. Try a different approach. If you're being mom, try to be somebody else, and how would that other entity get the kid to engage in what we need them to engage in. Also, I'm going to throw out there for you and I as we go through this, if something happens and the sound changes or is not working, my little headphones are probably going to die, but I think it'll just revert to the environment. So, but if suddenly you can't hear me, let me know.
Okay. All right, no, that's really good, and you kind of touched on it just now, but this is a question that I actually got from somebody else a while ago. What if you raise your children in a more laissez-faire manner, but now they have to live in a very more strictly authoritarian society, almost from one day to the next? It's a huge change, and if beforehand, I mean, the way if you have a more easygoing approach to raising your kids, there was no consequence. Right now there is. You can't, in many cases, can't let your kids play outside. We had people over here, the parks were closed, people doing that first anyway. Now last week, the cops were still fairly okay. They give you a warning. Then they started doing the fines. The fines were announced, and now it's I think it's 250 euros for the first fine. So that's right off the bat, and there's no discussion anymore. It's like people, you know now. There's no excuse not to know. So how do you control your kids? And I'm talking more generally as opposed to specific ages. What can we do to help them just navigate that?
If you have been a very, egalitarian, laissez-faire parent, and there are now rules that have to be followed, you can get your kids involved in creating the rules. And you just say, look, these are rules, I haven't had to follow. There are new rules coming from my boss, i.e. the government, or, your culture and your society, depending on the age of the child, how you frame it language-wise. And now we have to have some rules in the house that we've never had to have before. Help me make them. because then when you have to enforce them as a parent, the child has been part of developing the contract. And you can say, well, okay, but that's a rule that you helped me put in place when they fight back against it. So if we, and again, forced choice, there are certain things that are off the table right now, but we can perhaps like, all right, I can't do X, we can't do X, right? I know that's what you want to do. And I know now you're deciding that the rule that we made isn't good anymore. How do we do what we're supposed to and have a rule that works for us? So keep reinventing the contract, if you will. And you can actually create an actual contract, like write it on a piece of paper with your kiddo. These are the things that we're going to do. These are the things that you're going to do as, John, Susie, whatever your name is, the child. And then here are the things that I'm going to do as the parent as a result of you doing what you're going to do. And so as parents, we may have to be a little bit more overtly rewarding. And like the kid comes in and goes, I made my bed today. Excellent. And normally we might say good job, but now you might actually have to physically do something as a positive reinforcement for behavior. And this comes out of behavioral psychology when we're actually trying to modify a child's behavior whose behavior is kind of off the charts, is that it really must become very deliberate and get the child, the older they are, the more you can get them to feel like they helped create this contract, the more compliance you can expect because they agreed to it. Doesn't mean they will, but you can call them on it now. Like, hey, this is you said. So if you're not okay with that anymore, then we have to come up with another way to do this contract.
All right. Really like that. Pretty much the same question, but we talked a little bit before recording about this topic. And how do the people who are very much independent, freedom-minded, and so on, kind of like the pioneer mindset, they all of a sudden can't really function anymore in a way like, okay, just leave me alone and I'll be fine, because countries all over the world are actually meddling in your business like, okay, your freedoms are now restricted. And yes, constitution or not, and we talked about the same thing here in Belgium, pretty much any country. I would say constitution is suspended, but your civil liberties are being curtailed in some cases massively. And if this is kind of your thing, how do you deal with that?
That's a great question. I tell you what, if I had a go-to answer for you right now, I would never be worried about finances again. I could sell that thing.
Best guess.
I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but be aware that that's who you are. Know that that's who you are. And that's certainly one of my conversations with myself right now. It's like, because I'm a, don't tell me what to do kind of person. It's just why I work for myself. I tried the other. It doesn't always turn out well. So be mindful. This is who I am. And start assessing. So we still have, Viktor Frankl is one of the best touchstones for this in our postmodern society, because he was a physician, he was a psychiatrist, he was interned in the concentration camps, he survived it. And so his writings reflect profoundly, I think, on, in a very parallel sort of way, but not, it's apples to oranges, so I don't want to say that this is the same as that. We don't have people squirreling people away in the middle of the night and gassing and by thousands, but his mindset for self-agency that he codified into logotherapy, I think, is perfect right now for that independent person. You still have choice.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that can never be taken from you, is our capacity to determine who we will be in the events that we are forced to deal with. And that is where you have your ultimate freedom. You can be free without liberty. So if you're incarcerated, you do not have liberty, but you still have freedom. And that's like, acknowledge that and look at how, choose who you will be moment by moment, that is where your power remains. And that is at the end of the day, the source of your power regardless.
All right. Really good. I like that. We're coming pretty much at the end now before we switch over to the Patreon part. Anything you want to add or, say to the people that are listening? We covered quite a bit of ground.
Yeah, no, not really.
Okay, my question. So, no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying, hang in there.
That's actually good advice. I know you've been working a little bit on online teaching. Is there something that people can, sign up for or follow you or and so on?
Yeah, a couple of resources. We'll have, hopefully by the end of the day that you and I are recording this, on the Core Self-Defense website, and Core is with a K, we will have a platform that you can sign up for that will give you access to some of our like Zoom classes and other ways that you can get in and get access into some online training through our program here. And a good portion of that is really focused on this reality. All of our live classes are, I'm teaching from home. My other instructors are teaching from home. So we're modifying, like, all right, so this is how maybe we'll play with this. So that's a resource. I have recently, at the behest of some people who kind of guide me from a marketing standpoint, created a new Facebook page so that all my parents and my sister, they don't want to see all of this stuff all the time that I'm doing. So following me there, if people care to, is where I'm going to be pushing a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now. And it's the as far as like the identity.
Oh, I kind of lost you there at the end.
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay,
good. Just
yeah.
The last sentence was gone.
Okay. So the Facebook, I don't have anything. Okay, hang on. So the Facebook page where I'm going to be pushing a lot of this stuff is, if you just look for my name, Tammy McCracken, apparently there are several of us out there who knew. So specifically, it's, if you go at, that's the address, right, at doc, DOCTMAC, that's that Facebook page. It's new. So if people want to follow that, that's where I'm going to be putting, I'm doing some more writing and getting that up there, and resources that we develop, like more online resources and stuff. I'll post it there as well. So
awesome. And I'll put the links in the show notes for people. So if you go to womensblog.com/48, the numbers, I'll put all the links there, everything we covered, and include both the websites of Core Self-Defense and then your new Facebook page. Then people can, you won't have an excuse not to go there. Let's call it that way. So that answers my question. Where can people reach you? That's always the last question. So, okay. I think we covered quite a bit of ground. I'm really happy that we got to do that. I want to thank you for taking the time, because I know you're self-employed as well. So it's a crazy time for all of us. We are still going to record a little bit more for folks of you, everybody who's listening. I'm going to do the Patreon episode, which is some bonus questions from my patrons, and that one is going to be publicly available. So I'll put the link in the show notes as well. You can listen to that one too for free. It's going to be available because I want to make sure that everybody gets access to this material during these difficult times. Right, that's it. Thank you, Tammy.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.womensblog.com.